This video deals with the basic setup of the PolarSense system. From the main system menu, click on the setup icon. This takes you to the setup screen where tabs across the top let you access the different setup functions within PolarSense. We're going to start by clicking on value tables. Value tables are used to populate drop-down list boxes and selection boxes within the system. We need to set up your taxation assumptions in here. So click on the taxation icon. You'll see the system comes set up with a HST of 13%. If this isn't the tax rate or tax type that you use, click Add New Entry. Give it a name. This name will appear on your purchase orders, invoices, quotations. Give it the rate, 8% in this case. Submit the update. Now I've got two tax rates. Add as many tax rates as you need. Delete the ones that you don't need in here. You can set up as many as you want. So if you do work in different provinces, different counties, you've got 4 or 5 different tax structures to deal with, set them all up in here, give them a unique name, and you'll be able to access them when you quote on a job. Next, click on the Company Defaults tab. First thing you'll see is company name and address information, phone number, email address. Make sure this is correct. Make sure it's upper and lower case properly. This information appears on your letterhead, so what you put in here is exactly what you're going to see on, or your customer is going to see on your quotations, your invoices, etc. So take the time, make sure it's correct. Underneath that is measurement system. You can select either imperial or metric depending on how you measure up your jobs. Quotation with job and job analysis assumptions is next. This quote with labor and base labor is a very important thing to get right. Without checking this box, the system assumes that when you're doing a quote, it calculates the amount of product you need, calculates the cost price to you of that product, and then it assumes you're going to mark that up by a certain percentage to arrive at your quote. So you mark it up by 80%, 70%, whatever your markup is. That markup includes labor, overhead, profit, everything. Most companies use this method. It's the simplest way to do it, it's the fastest way to do it, and it's the most common way. Some people, though, prefer to calculate the amount of product they need, but also estimate how many hours of labor it's going to take to install that product, multiply that times the labor rate, and add that into the quote. It makes for a much more accurate quote, but again, it's not used by the majority of people. So if you want to actually quote on labor for each individual item that you install, you would check quote with labor, and you would enter a base labor rate to be used in your quotations. Next thing is markup defaults. There's two sets. There's new commercial customer and new residential customer. You'll see throughout PolarSense, commercial business is kept separate from residential. In this case, you probably have different markups you'd use for your residential versus your commercial. Typically, commercial will be a lower markup business, or you may want to mark up specific types of products differently. For example, there's separate markups for spray foam, batting, loose, rigid coating, and other. Other can be polyethylene sheeting, staples, whatever else you would use in a quote. And you can even mark up labor if you want in here, although most people don't. So enter the markups that you plan to use when you're quoting a job, and bear in mind these are defaults for a new quote. Once you're in the quotation process, you can change these defaults so your quote arrives at whatever value you want it to arrive at the end. But if you find that you quote often at, say in this case here, 50% markup, then this will save you a bit of work because it'll automatically calculate it correctly for you. Underneath it are new customer tax defaults. Here's where those tax rates are that we added. We got JST and HST in here. Pick the tax rates that you would typically use for a new customer where you operate. And if you have a job that's in a different area that has a different tax structure, you can change that at the time you quote. You're not locked into this. It's just a default to help save some time later. Click Submit Update. We've locked in these changes. Let's click on Customize Forms tab next. This is where you can control the wording that goes on the different forms that your system produces. Starting off with residential quote terms and conditions. Whatever you would normally put on your quotation form or plan on putting on your quote needs to be in here. Typical things are how long the quote is good for. That includes materials and labor. Any alterations to the specifications is going to cost extra. Pay the crew. Whatever you were going to put on your quote, put it in here. The system will put it on the quote for you. The next box is residential invoice terms and conditions. You don't have to use the system for invoicing. Once you do want to use it for invoicing, this is where you'll put your terms and conditions on here. Next is the commercial quote terms and conditions and commercial invoice terms and conditions. So the same thing as above, except for your commercial jobs. Typically, commercial jobs will have different length of time that the quote is good for, and also very different terms and conditions for payments. Next is the purchase order footer. This is if you're going to use a system for purchasing. If you're not going to do that from the start, don't worry about it right now. This is the footer line where you're going to say things like if you're tax exempt, if your province requires you to have a tax exemption number, you'd enter it on here. Next box is the purchase order shipping instructions. If you have a different yard or warehouse that you ship your materials to that's separate from your office, put the address in here. Next is common to all forms. You can pick from 3 different fonts, so your form can look a little different from your neighbors. And also you can position the logo left or right. That means the left or the right of the name and address information on your letterhead. Below that is where you can upload a logo. Over on the right, you'll see it's got to be a JPEG file, no more than 200K in size. Square seems to be the best format, fits the letterheads the best. If you have any difficulty with this, send an email to PolarSense support. We'll give you a place you can email your logo to, or scan a copy, or however get it to us. We'll adjust it, Photoshop it, upload it, no charge. If you do have a logo that meets these requirements, just click on Choose File, find it in your system, and then do the Submit Update on the bottom. That locks in all the changes that you would have made to the forms, and if you scroll right to the bottom, it'll show you what your current logo is. Bubbles in this case. The last setup item to get going with PolarSense is click on the Employees tab, and whoever set themselves up initially on PolarSense is the first employee. They have admin access. If you're going to have another person using a system, just add them in. Add new employee, give them a login ID and a password. Access level can be admin or employee. Admin has full reign in the system. Employee can't get into the setup functions. So it's restricted set. So choose the appropriate one and give their name and address and other information. You know the Kafka number's in here. If you enter your Kafka number now, it'll be there for when you need to use it later on in the system. PolarSense can automate submitting your daily work record to Kafka, but you need to have the Kafka number in here. You can do this later on as well. That's it. After you do this basic setup, you should be all set to start quoting jobs based on Polar Foam products.